some good news. I want you to know that there's always good news in the text. We look to the newspaper and we see bad news. We watch the news and we find bad news, but there's always good news to be found in the Word of God. There are times in our lives when the people of God are struggling, but this text helps us to see when such conditions prevail that God sends us words of comfort to remind us that He has given us His power. Therefore, we can endure. When meditating on this text, there were three things that spoke to me about the sufficiency of God. First, this text lets me know that struggling shows us that God does not always answer our prayers the way we want Him to answer them. Verse 8 says, 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. Paul asked 3 times for his thorn to be removed. He could do so because he knew firsthand that God was able to hear and answer prayers. Paul witnessed firsthand God's ability to do the miraculous on numerous occasions. In Acts 14:10, Paul prayed, and a lame man was cured. He witnessed God bringing Eutychus back to life in Acts 20:10. Paul had the opportunity to observe God perform many and wonderful, marvelous acts for others, and now he was calling on God to act on his behalf. It is reasonable to assume that Paul simply wanted God to do for him what he had watched him do for others. It is reasonable to assume that Paul simply wanted God to answer a prayer for him. Whatever the thorn was, Paul asked 3 times to remove it, and 3 times the Lord refused. It was not that the Lord did not hear his prayers, but it was that the answer was simply no. Whatever the case may be, God did not answer the prayer the way Paul wanted him to answer. I remember feeling this way in my own life. In 2004, my aunt, my cousin, and my grandmother passed away, all in a matter of 8 months. All 3 deaths were sudden and unexpected, and it felt like the floor had literally been ripped from beneath me. I cried out to the Lord in desperation. Over and over, I remember asking Him to take the hurt, the pain, and the confusion away. As with Paul, I knew that God possessed the ability to free me from this heavy load that I was carrying. Morning after morning, I woke up feeling the same way. Morning after morning, God did not answer my prayer the way I wanted Him to answer it. J. Vernon McGee says, sometimes you and I keep asking the Lord for something to which He has already answered no. If He doesn't give us what we ask for, we think that He has not answered our prayer. More often than not, His answer to our prayer is simply no. Eventually, I discovered that His no was the best possible answer He could have given me. And some of us, as we look back over our lives and reflect on some of the things that we prayed for, some of the things that we thought we wanted, some of the things that we thought we couldn't make it without, some of the things that we thought we absolutely needed. And we can look back over our lives at some of the prayers that the Lord didn't answer the way we wanted Him to answer. And we can say, God, I just want to say thank you. I didn't know, sometimes we want things that we really don't need, or we think we need things that aren't really good for us, but God will hold back those things. And we can look back over those things and say, God, I thank you for keeping me from that. God, I thank you for breaking me away from that. I thought I needed it. I thought I couldn't live without it, but you saw much further than I could see. You knew much better than I knew. Your wisdom guided me. Your discernment kept me. And Lord, I just want to say thank you that you didn't give me what I thought I asked for. My understanding of this quote brings me to my second observation in this text. Second, struggling stretches our view of God, and it keeps us grounded in Him. Verse 7 states, therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, but to keep me from being too elated. As believers, we are sometimes lured into a small, confined perspective of God. We begin to believe that God only works like we think He should work, and how we have observed Him working in the past. But the Lord spoke to us through Isaiah, and He said, I will do a new thing. I'm not going to always come the way you think I'm going to come. I'm not going to always do it the way you want me to do it, because if do it. You will begin to think that I'm a bellhop. You will begin to think I'm like Santa Claus, that you can make a list. You will begin to have a slot machine mentality. You think you can drop your prayers in a hole and the answers will come back out. But God says every once in a while, I will remind you that I am God. I am the one that's in control. I am the one that takes care of situations. I am the one that can do what no other power can do. God always worked the way we wanted him to work. We would begin to think that we were God. We would begin to think that God owed us something, that he had to operate the way we wanted him to operate. But don't you know God can work through any situation? We may ask God for a good report from the doctor, but God will sometimes give us a not so good report from the doctor to show us that the doctor is not your healer, but I am your healer. God may not always send the money to pay the bill, but God will show you that I can touch the heart of people to keep the lights on. I can touch the heart of the bill collector to keep things going even when they think it should be shut off. God said, I am God, and I am in control. God shows us that he's able to work outside of our limited ability to comprehend him. You know, we look at our situations, we look at our paychecks, and many of us don't even understand fully. Our human minds won't allow us to conceive why we're able to have what we have, how we live in the houses that we live in and drive the cars that we drive, because our credit scores may say that we don't deserve it. But God will let us know when my grace is upon you, when my favor is upon you, you can do things that you would not be able to do on your own. God is able to work outside of our limited ability to comprehend him. The word says that he is able to do the exceeding abundant. God says, his word says that he will allow us to experience the exceeding greatness of his power. God can work. God can open a door. God can even shut a door so he can open up a window. God will let us know that he is God and he is in control. During our struggles, we're forced to stretch our view of God. We tend to take a look at our ideas relating to how God responds to us and in our struggles. God, the word says that he uses our struggles for our good. Romans 8:28 says all things work together for your good. That thing you went through that you didn't know why you went through it. That thing you experienced that you didn't want to tell anything about. The word says, God says, if you give it to me, I'll work even that for your good. That thing that you thought was wasted time or wasted effort, God says, I'll work even that for your good. But you've got to give it to me and you've got to trust me. God will take your mess and turn it into a message and birth a ministry. So we can't say that anything is wasted time. We can't say that anything is wasted effort. If we give it to God, he'll work it out and he'll work it out for our good. Struggling stretches our view of God by teaching us that God uses our difficulties to draw us closer to him. Our difficulties teach us how to take God at his word. I believe there's a song that says, if I never had a problem, I wouldn't know that you could solve. If I never had a hurtful day, I wouldn't know that you could take all my pain away. If I always had sunshiny days, I wouldn't know that you were there all times. The song says, whether the day be sunny or dreary, whether the day be happy or sad, Jesus is always there. He lets us know that he's not just there in the good times, but he's there in all times. He's not just good when the bills are paid, but he's good when we don't know how they're going to be paid. God is good all the time. Paul does not run to anybody else to alleviate the pain of his problems, but Paul runs closer to God as opposed to running farther away from him. Some people go through things and they experience situations and they run away from church. When they start going through things, you don't see them anymore. But when I'm going through, I need church more than ever, because I've lived long enough to know that I can't make it without the Lord. There's a song that says I've tried over and over, but I found out that there is no other way but to make it. I can't make it without you. Paul runs closer to God as opposed to running farther away from him. His pride was expelled and his humility was instituted. Paul's storm was an effective cure or for any mistaken euphoria that visions might stir up. So in other words, the Lord sent this storm Paul's way so he wouldn't begin to think that he was working in his own power, that he was working in his own strength, that he was doing his own thing. The Lord sent this storm to let him know that it's me that you need to rely on, that you're not doing this on your own. You're doing this because my mighty power is working inside of you. God wanted Paul to remain humble and fully aware of his own weakness, and this storm punctured any pride that might well up within Paul. Paul's storm brought a new level of awareness of God's infinite power. This power sustained him in moments of weakness and in struggles. The thorn that the apostle referenced to erased any pride and enabled Paul to see himself. This storm magnified his dependence on God, for only God could sustain him when he exclaimed, "That's enough." Finally, the third thing that this text lets me know is that suffering shares with us what we need to make it. Verse 9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." God may not have given Paul everything that he wanted, but he sure enough gave him everything that he needed. God's affirmative words to the apostle confirmed that God was aware of his struggles. God assured Paul that his grace was sufficient. The text used the word sufficient to symbolize that what he gave Paul was enough. It was adequate and it was plenty. In other words, God's grace to the apostle could withstand his torment. Even though the thorn would remain, he was supplied with the nutrients that he needed to remain strong, firm, and unwavering. That's why Paul could tell us to be steadfast, be immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. The sufficiency of God's grace allowed Paul to have confidence in the power and the presence of God. The sufficiency of God's grace caused him not to focus on his thorn in the flesh, but on the divine providence of God. This speaks to the undeniable fact that God is in touch with the feelings of our infirmities. Likewise, brothers and sisters, this grace, this sufficient grace, is available to you, and it's available to me. Whatever our thorns may be, God's grace is sufficient enough to keep us. We can have confidence in his grace because in deep moments of weakness and struggle, God's power is manifested. The word says that God's power is manifested in weakness. God's power permeates our being and strengthens us in weaknesses. There are moments when we don't know how we're going to make it. We don't know where to turn. We don't know who to call. We don't know what scripture to read. But God will let us know that even in your hard times, even when you're in your most difficult times, in the midnight hour, when your pillow is soaked with tears, my grace is sufficient. My grace is what will get you through. My grace will keep you going. My grace will help you to run on to see what the end is going to be. So we don't have to worry about when our power runs out. God's power is available to us. When our power depletes, when we need to take a nap, we need to go to sleep to replenish our strength. But the word lets us know that God never slumbers nor sleeps. He never gets tired. He never has to take a power nap. He never has to go and rest. God moves from strength to strength. He moves from grace to grace. He moves from glory to glory. He moves from strength to strength. So when we get weak, we can reach out to him. When we feel like we can't make it anymore, we can call on him. When we feel like we can't move another step, God says we can go to him. And the word lets us know if we wait on him, he will renew our strength. He'll allow us to mount up with wings like eagles. He will allow us to run and not get weary. He will allow us to walk and not faint. So we've got to learn how to wait on the Lord. We've got to learn how to count on the Lord. We've got to learn how to trust in the Lord. And I don't know what, I want to point out that we don't know for sure exactly what Paul's thorn was. But we know that it was an affliction of some kind. It may have been a physical affliction. It may have been a mental affliction. It may have been emotional affliction that brought Paul praying and distress. Some think that Paul had an eye affliction, but we don't know for sure. And I believe it's a good thing that we don't know for sure. It's a good thing that we don't know, because whatever our sufferings may be, whatever our struggles may be, we can apply our situation. We can apply what Paul learned to our situation, and we can be encouraged on our that's enough. I can't handle this any longer. But God answered Paul with his own words, but it changes the meaning. God answers Paul by saying, that's enough. That is enough. What I've given you is enough. As a matter of fact, it's more than enough. Therefore, like Paul, I can be content in my weaknesses, in my insults, in my hardships, persecutions, and calamity, for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, that's when I can be strong. You may be feeling like Sugar Ray Leonard did in the first fight. Life has beat you up, and your circumstances seem to have won the fight. The scorecards have been counted, and the victory has seemingly been declared. The opponent, the adversary, has already claimed the victory. He and his team may be cheering because they think that they've knocked you out for the last time. But we've got to know, I want to encourage you to get back in the ring. Friends may have deserted you, but get back in the ring. Your pink slip may have come, but get back in the ring. The doctor's report may be nailed, but get back in the ring. Tears may be soaking your pillow, but get back in the ring. You may be ready